Okay, so this video kind of explains what's going on. So, the United States, and I would bet that just like the United States is a proxy army for Europe, that we're a proxy bank for Europe too. The European banking system goes all the way back to like the Knights Templar, and that's something we need to get into someday, because regardless of what people think of as conspiracy theory, the Knights Templar runs the banking system, runs the legal system, all from its little headquarters on Fleet Street in London. And I happen to believe what I've read about they being kind of an umbrella over this whole, we refer to it as the Illuminati, but what it is just people. Certain group of people. And in a lot of ways, I see how that certain group of people is responsible for all of our woes, for all of our suffering, and for a lot of the damage and destruction around the world, and the horror, especially the horror, the really horrible things, people being tortured, people dying horribly in bombings, in all kinds of horrible ways. All that seems to come from there. I lived there for a little while in Oxford, and I should have gone, but I didn't know about it. Done a little hands-on research. Maybe one of these days I'll get to. But so the way the U.S. has got its claws into, and all I'm talking about Europe about is, I think that they're the real ones, that we're just doing it on, together, but also on their behalf. We're like a proxy economic system. I mean, obviously the European, this old system going back to monarchy and everything, has been around a lot longer than the United States, and as such I can't hardly imagine that it's not in some way subordinate to it. For sure they work together. The question is why. The only reason why would be because it is to a certain extent subordinate to it. Anyway, so what and that doesn't ever seem to come into any of the information I get. It's always the US, the US sanctions, the US this, the US that, which we also get to take all the blame for any bad things that happen from those, just like we get to take the blame for any bad things that happen to that we do to countries with our military. Whereas, is it really us? I mean, isn't all of Europe, the British, to a certain extent all of Europe, behind us? I mean, I don't see them going to war with us over what we're doing in Iraq. As a matter of fact, we had a coalition of all those European countries where they would send their token troops. Okay, I didn't really get into this for that. What I wanted to know is how the U.S. has its teeth sunk into these countries, and from what I understand now, somehow the United States didn't allow trade in general, and for sure in oil, to be done outside of the US dollar. Now, how did they do that? I don't know. And they couldn't have told Russia when it was the USSR that it had to trade in dollars. So I'm saying this was done very quickly. And I must say, if it turns out that it really was done, that it was a thing that happened, that like after Russia, USSR fell, Russia immediately started using dollars to trade in oil. So I guess we controlled the international markets, and we only, everything was done with dollars. So all these countries, even our enemies, had to, if they wanted to participate in that, then they had to do it in dollars. But that is clear from what
yeah, so
right
this is
here.
pretty straightforward for Russia. Obviously, Russia's been the target of a pretty aggressive U.S. sanctions campaign since 2014, and Russia anticipates that further sanctions might cut it off further from the international finance system. So they're stacking gold because gold has been an alternative international payment system for most of history, and they would use that to conduct international transactions instead of the U.S. dollar. They recently dumped 84% of their U.S. debt holdings. It really doesn't make sense for Russia to hold on to debt of a country that's targeting with sanctions.
Yeah, that seems to make some sense. Now, Russia did this in October, right? China also made a similar move. It's the largest holder of U.S. debt. Why is it following in Russia's footsteps?
Yeah, so China's in a similar position. Tensions between China and the U.S. have been very bad. Obviously, there's this trade war, and underlying the trade war is this U.S. recognition that China is...
Okay, so they're going to go through all these countries that are now talking to each other, and so there's obviously, and it's not just propaganda, it's pretty obvious that a lot of countries, including, they mentioned Japan, but obviously North Korea, Venezuela, all these countries that we're sanctioning, are all getting together and setting up a new system, which I knew that they had, to conduct trade without the US dollar. It just amazes me that they couldn't already do that, or that they weren't doing it very much. I don't know why any country would do trade in another country's currency. It just doesn't make sense to me. And it doesn't make sense to me that any country would be powerful enough, or any group like Europe, the United States, Canada, Australia, the white countries, could impose an economic system on the rest of the world, on all the other countries. You know, it's like inserting yourself as a middleman in the economy. So telling everybody, well, you know, you can't do business unless you pay us first. It's just, I don't know. I guess if I had to analyze it, that in my opinion, it amazes me that anybody allows middlemen without having a gun pointed at them, you know, without this huge threat. I mean, it just seems to me like the only way that somebody could sell, say somebody across the street wants to buy my car, and then his neighbor says to him, well, you can't buy his car unless you pay me 10%. Instantly that would be like war, right? I mean, but it appears that that's exactly what goes on, and that these people, whoever they are, you know, Goldman Sachs, I don't know who's doing it, and I didn't mean to just throw that name out, but it's an obvious possibility that somebody like that, some people who have a lot of power, are the ones who are doing this kind of stuff. And nobody fights back because nobody wants to get hurt, right? And these people are actually threatening enough that they can maintain their positions as middlemen, probably using U.S. taxpayer dollars to pay for a military that can enforce that threat. You know, you will pay us or we will, you know, drop you. I mean, it's funny because it's so scary, right? I mean, it's kind of like watching a horror movie. So it does crack me up that it's, because it's so sick. And because I don't understand it. And I think the only thing we can do is laugh at things that we don't understand that are scary.